Welcome to The Exchange with KB. The Exchange is a short podcast where we get to know interesting people and their thoughts on blockchain, building and scaling businesses, success and failure, and much more. Today, I'd like to introduce a good friend of mine, Rob May. Rob's a fellow Bostonian, the founder and CEO of Talla, as well as the founder of Botchain. Welcome, Rob.
Thanks for having me, KB.
Thank you. All right, so let's start out. Let's hear a little bit about your background. Tell us a little bit about just your previous experience, your background, and take us up to what you're doing nowadays.
Yeah, so I'm originally a hardware engineer, and I came up a hardware engineering path into sales engineering and general management. I worked for two startups, an online media startup and a embedded software startup. And then I started a company called Backupify that did backup for cloud computing applications like Google Apps and Salesforce. We grew that company to about 9,000 customers, 90 employees. We sold that in December 2014. And took a little bit of time off to figure out what I wanted to do next. Got really, really interested in artificial intelligence after reading some papers on machine learning approaches to natural language processing. I also looked a lot at blockchain and IoT during that space. At time, I read a couple of the early blockchain papers, for example, and the Satoshi's original paper, Sidechains, and started doing a lot of investing, mostly AI, but I've also done a little bit of crypto and blockchain investing, and then started a company called Talla, and Talla does a lot of sort of bot-based automation using machine learning, particularly around knowledge management and customer support and things that are sort of unstructured text driven, because that's our real expertise, is being able to deal with unstructured text much better than the vast majority of tools that you'll use.
Cool. So if you could sum up Talla, like what challenge, what problem does Talla solve in a short form?
So if you have Talla actually solves a lot of different challenges. There's a lot of ways to use it. It's very platformy like that. The number one use case is to deploy it to reps for sales and support rather than to end customers, and allow them to quickly find information that they need to answer customer queries. And we do that. One of the challenges you have with most sort of knowledge bases or similar tools is that people do keyword searches. So somebody comes in, you have a complex product, and they say, does this work with Fedora Linux? And you don't even know what that is. So you Google, I shouldn't say Google, you search the knowledge base for Fedora, 27 articles come up, you're digging through them while you're on the phone to try to figure out which one answers your question. With Talla, you just get an answer back. And we do that through a variety of NLP and NLU methods. So we've been able to have, we have a customer that, for example, will save over $1.5 million this year by allowing them to hire 30 fewer support reps because they're so much more efficient and productive. And so we've been having a lot of success with that.
Wow. So for people who don't know, what does LP and LU, what does that stand for?
Yeah, natural language processing and natural language understanding. And so natural language processing is really, that's NLP. That means taking it and sort of pulling it apart into its different meanings. What do the words mean? What is the syntax? Is this a question? Is it a sentence? Is it what is it? And then NLU is natural language understanding. That means taking the thing that was typed or said or whatever and really taking some action on it or doing something with the result of it, because you think what the words mean when put together. So
awesome. And you're running Botchain as well. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So the idea behind Botchain is that you're about to be in this world where you're going to have all kinds of little autonomous agents running around. You hear this thing a lot about the future where it says, people say, well, isn't it going to be great? Like your bots are going to be able to contact people and do things on your behalf. And it's like, well, if somebody contacts you and says, hey, I'm Rob's scheduling bot, and I want to schedule a meeting with you, and this and that and the other happens, or I want this information from you, you're Rob's friend, so you owe me $20 for this thing, whatever it is. How do you know that bot works for me? How do you know that I own that bot? How do you know all these kinds of things? And so when you look at how hackers, they spoof web pages, they spoof emails, they're spoofing bots. And what Botchain attempts to do is to use blockchain, and in particular, a subset of blockchain called the token curated registry, to basically give an ID to every autonomous agent. So the way that humans have an ID, whether it's a passport or driver's license or social security number or whatever, imagine if you make every bot, in order to go out and operate on, any kind of significant system in the world, have one of those things. And so it's a little bit like it's a little bit like sort of DNS for the web, right? When you go to a website, how do you know you can trust it?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That sounds interesting. Let me see if I understand the use case. And like I'm going to try to tie Talla in with Botchain and tell me if I'm misunderstanding something. But Talla is a platform for bots, right? You could build bots on top of Talla. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, and then Botchain will essentially take all these bots around the world and have them at the end of the day, have them communicate and trust each other more. So like if I built a bot, let's say for HR or for IT use on top of Talla, let's say for IT support, would that be a valid use case for Talla?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, and then let's say another company built a specific app support bot on a different platform altogether, and now I'm on Talla, I might be able to call up the bot that's built on Talla and then maybe communicate via Botchain to this other bot and know that it's actually owned by that trusted party that that says that owns it. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So you can use Botchain as the identifier that's independent and of anything else, and only ties to that one specific instance of the bot. And what's interesting about that is if you think about a directory like that that's going to exist someday, isn't it best that be on a decentralized ledger where nobody fully owns it or controls it, but it's sort of community driven and community controlled? I mean, do you want Facebook or Amazon or Google to own that? I don't think you do.
Absolutely not. I mean, based on the things that we're seeing happening with the centralized, social network search engines, et cetera, these days, I certainly would not want to entrust any single company with all that data.
Yeah.
Awesome, man. So let's talk a little bit about your background, if you don't mind. You're originally from Kentucky, is that right?
Yeah. So grew up in Louisville and then went to University of Kentucky, and actually happened to be there when they won 2 national basketball titles. So it was a lot of fun. Nice.
Because I met you originally. If we think back, this is I can't remember, 4 or 5 years ago, maybe. Probably right after you exited Backupify. I met you through my previous company, which you helped advise on a little bit, Unigma. So you're like your span of your wealth of knowledge ranges from enterprise IT and then blockchain and AI. So how did you learn about AI? How did you really get into it? And I know now you're like one of the most prolific writers. You have a newsletter that a lot of people subscribe to. So how did you get into it?
Yeah, I actually, a lot of people don't know this, but I started a master's degree in computer science. So after college, I worked in Florida, Space Coast, so down near, Cape Canaveral, and the whole defense and space industry down there. I did hardware design, and I went to Florida Institute of Technology for a master's degree in computer science, and the focus was on AI. Now, this was the early 2000s, maybe 2003, 2004. And so at the time, AI programming was basically, it wasn't neural networks, right? It was symbolic logic processing with Lisp. And, I got about halfway through the program and I went, oh, this is a waste of my time. So I was into it and I followed it, but I decided not to go into the space aggressively right then. And so after that, I followed it over the years conceptually, but, and then when I sold Backupify, and realized that, hey, I think AI is going to be a thing now. I think the time is right. I actually hired a data science tutor to walk me through some data science projects so that I could understand a little bit about, not because I was going to write the code for Talla, but just because, if you understand how those things get done, you can interact with the people who do those things a little better. And so went through and did that, and then started Talla, and just decided that there was a lot of technical work out there and newsletters and papers and stuff for AI, and there wasn't anybody really talking about applications or building businesses around AI. And so I decided to sort of go out and address that and try to talk about it. And it's been a tremendous amount of fun, right, to be on the front lines of some of this and talking to a lot of people, because AI companies are very different in how they're built. And I think the buyer's market for AI tools. They're still figuring out what they want. They're still trying to understand how AI tools are different and how you interact with them and how they get deployed. And so there's some challenges there to really get the industry to scale, but I'm sure their challenges will overcome.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So I love the fact that you really like roll up your sleeves and get hands on the projects that you do. I mean, do you consider yourself a technician, a salesman, or both?
Boy, that's a good question. I'm probably a geeky general manager is what it is, right? So I think I've been CEO now too long to have any really practical skills, other than hiring people and trying to manage people, push them in the right direction. But I am a geek at heart, so I do like to dig into things, right? I don't do any of the coding for Talla or any of my companies, but I do, from time to time, try to play around with some of that stuff just so I know and understand it. And I do think that gives me an advantage when building a tech company to have a little more detailed understanding of the underlying technology, particularly when you're trying to think about where it might go, right? It's these things are very path dependent, depending on the early uses of the technology and how it's configured and all that kind of stuff. So
sure. And was Backupify your very first business, or did you have other businesses before that?
It was my first venture-backed business. I had, we'll say 2.5 other businesses, depending on how you want to count, because I had a franchise that I owned, excuse me, for a while. That was a sports training franchise. I owned that for a year, and I did not enjoy that, so I sold back out of it. And then I had a software business with another friend of mine from Kentucky that we never could raise money for. It got a little bit of revenue, and we were able to license it, the software, to some people and make a little bit of money on it. And then I was a very, very early blogger, and I was able to use my blog to promote some of the projects I was involved with, and eventually to sell it for a little bit of money. So I didn't really consider it a business at the time, but it kind of turned into a business. Started making a nice little side money for me in sort of 2006, 2007 timeframe.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So I mean, you ran a small business, a venture-backed business, different size businesses. You've exited to a large company. What do you find the most challenging in that experience? I mean, and what do you enjoy the most? Do you enjoy the early stages, the ideas, the strategy behind building a company, or do you enjoy scaling a company? What's most challenging to you?
I think scaling is most fun. And the reason it's most fun is because you can test your ideas quicker, right? When you have customers and you have existing, channels to acquire those customers, to distribute your product, you have partners. When you have an idea about something, you can actually go do it when you have some resources. When you're a startup, you have a million ideas that you can't pursue. And so you're placing this bet that like, oh man, there's like 20 directions this product could go, and I can only pick one, rather than say, 4 if I was a bigger company maybe. And so I think so I don't like that piece. And while I am personally very comfortable with all the uncertainty and ambiguity in early stages, I find it very, very hard to manage a team through those things, because once you get some customers and some revenue and some scale, you have data, you have metrics, you have a customer council you can talk to. But otherwise, you're just, particularly if you're starting a business in a new market, right? At least if you're attacking an existing market, people can tell you what they want. But, customer feedback, in my experience, isn't even that valuable when you're building something that's really brand new. And so customers are, and it's hard because sometimes you don't know what the shape of a problem is going to look like. So I'll give you an example. VCs will often say, solve some hair on fire problem for somebody, but it's actually entirely rational. There's a lot of good business ideas that aren't hair on fire problems yet. So, if 2013 or 2014, you saw the rise of drones and saw them being more used in construction and agriculture and security, it would have been entirely logical to start work on an operating system for a fleet of drones. That's an entirely, valid thing to put money into, in my opinion. But nobody had that problem yet. There was nobody yet who was big enough that was like, oh my gosh, I've got all these drones and I can't manage them. But you could see it coming. And if you waited until it's a big problem for somebody, then somebody else is probably already doing it. So sometimes you have to invest ahead of those curves. And it's really hard because if you go and you talk to customers and you say, well, what would you like to see in a fleet management solution for drones? It's like they can tell you what they think, but they don't really know yet because we're not there. So I think it's really, really hard to guide your team through those time periods because you don't have, you can get into a lot of arguments and bog down, and it's just one person's perspective against another, and you don't really have there's no data, there's no customers, there's nothing to really, pin your hopes on and say like, hey, this is the reason we're making that decision. So that's what I'll tell you this, after Talla, I will never start another early stage company from scratch as CEO. If I do, I might do one in a different role, CTO or co-founder or executive chair, but I won't do it as CEO.
Why is that?
Because I just don't like that phase. I'd rather go in as CEO to something that's already got a little bit of money. I mean, when we got acquired by Datto, I ran all the marketing and business development for the combined company, which was 10 times bigger than my company was, and it was a lot of fun, man. I loved it.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but you're probably a data guy, right? So you like it when there's some data available and you can manipulate and play with that data and then take action based on the results. Am I correct?
Yeah, I do. Right. I would say I'm not religious about data. I like to look at it and use it to inform a decision, but I wouldn't say I'm more, I'm thoughtful about data, but I wouldn't say I'm sort of purely data driven.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And what drives your business decisions? I have a lot of just different mental frameworks that I use over time, and I try to do things that, sometimes you have to think short term, because, you just need to, hit a target or get some, financing round done or whatever. And you can't always have everything that you want. But then, given the ability to do it, I like to think long term about the business. And so most of my business decisions are driven by what's best for the company, what will put the company in the best position sort of 2 years out from now. Mm-hmm. But are any of these decisions, are most of them data driven, or some of them, or most of them sort of gut driven, or it's a combination of the two?
Yeah, it's definitely a combination. I mean, sometimes you can see things in the trends, the way things are going, and you can extrapolate out and make some guesses on that. But other times, I think you just have to think about the broader themes and frameworks for how products get adopted and penetrate markets, and it's more like an analogy making exercise.
Right. I agree with you. I mean, I think data, a lot of people talk about data, and it certainly is very helpful. Data is something that's usually already occurred, right? So we're looking at history. History does not always repeat itself, and in some places it never repeats itself. So I think CEOs, founders develop sort of a sixth sense after doing this for so many years, that you could look at the data, you could look at other things, you could look at other markets, you could think and then make a decision based on sort of a combination of all these things. And a lot of times it's the right decision. And I read and listen to a lot of different founders kind of using that approach, in their businesses.
Yep.
Cool. So let's talk about, I think that kind of segues us into talking a little bit about your investments. You mentioned you do some investing. Can you tell me a little bit about sort of your investment thesis? What kind of companies you invest in? What drives those investments?
Yeah, I started doing AI investing in 2015 before many people were looking at it. And so if you're going to do angel investing, the thing you have to think about is, how do you make sure you don't just see the crappy deals that can't get funded and end up going on the angel circuit? How do you see the best deals, right? The deals that don't even hit the main platforms and the main networks sometimes. And so it's part of why I started writing my newsletter, right? Because my number one source of deal flow is people reach out to me, they read the newsletter, inside.com AI, and they say, I love how you think. I know you're an angel investor. I'd love to have you involved in my company. So I met a lot of people that way, and then a lot of people through AI-related events. And my thesis is, if I believe in the founder and I believe in the market, I don't need to believe in the product. Products can change, and I believe smart founders will pivot their products to find the right sweet spot in the market. And so I do a lot of diligence on the founders, and by diligence I just mean lots of talking to them mostly. Not necessarily talking to other people they've worked with. I'm trying to get at how they think about the world and how flexible are they. And then I ask myself, because when you're doing angel investing, most of your companies aren't going to go anywhere. I ask myself, like, if everything went right, because I know all the things that could go wrong to kill a company, but if everything went right, could this be a really big opportunity? Because I'm going to need one or two of those to cancel out my 35 companies that are going to die probably. And so that's what I look for. And I've been fortunate to get into some really, really great, great companies. I mean, my biggest markup to date is probably Mythic, the AI hardware chip, which is a pretty good deal.
Awesome. That sounds very interesting. Can you talk about, is their valuation public? Can you talk about that, or is that private still?
Honestly, I don't know, and I don't remember specifically what it is, so I couldn't tell you. But yeah, it's I was in at a seed round, and they've raised a very nice Series B, I remember. So
great. And so what's next? I mean, as far as your investments, are you continuing looking at different AI plays? What's next in the sort of investment for you?
Well, I've gone back and forth between whether to continue to do the angel thing or raise a small fund. I need to stay and run Talla for now. And so I don't have time to sort of invest full time. But I've thought about raising a fund and doing some more significant investing up market, although not on the scale of a normal VC, but just in sort of my favorite deals or something like that. So yeah, I don't really know. I think the AI market's definitely gotten more competitive, and the valuations have been driven up, and dumber stuff is getting funded. So that's always a risk. So I think I'll stay in AI, but I probably need to find some different approach to it in order to be successful, because when you do what everybody else is doing, it just doesn't work.
Yeah. And what about blockchain? What are your thoughts? What's next there? Are you still excited about the space? What are your thoughts on that?
I am. It's regrettable that Ether and Bitcoin have pulled back so much, because I just think there's a ton of value and potential in both of those tools and those markets. And I think, I think cryptocurrency is going to be a great thing. I wish the US SEC would take it more seriously and realize that there are legitimate use cases for utility tokens. I wish they'd have a utility versus security token definition. But I'm bullish. I think it's going to be a little longer term out, a little further out before we see the value. But I think there's going to be a lot of good stuff going on there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I like what Switzerland and Singapore have done recently with sort of creating a new asset class for utility tokens. Do you think that's ever going to happen in the US or no?
I hope so. I think it should. I think the US will be at a significant disadvantage if it doesn't. I mean, we should be leading here. And you've got, I don't know. It's hard for me to understand why you can let people play the lottery, but you can't let people buy blockchain tokens unless they're already rich, right? And then you complain about inequality in wealth, and it's like, well, you have to have $1 million net worth before you can make a lot of these investments, and it's really not fair. And to be fair, I realize there should be some limits, but there's a difference between somebody who's really bad with money and doesn't have enough money to invest in. But think about a college professor who makes $140,000 a year and studies economics and maybe has a net worth of $600,000. Like, you're telling me that person, she's not able to go, make educated guesses about investing in cryptocurrency. Like, she totally should. And I think they need some better distinctions there.
Absolutely. I mean, we could have a whole other episode on the regulatory and on all that stuff, but I agree with you. And this is my personal opinion is, if one can go to the casino and use their credit cards and perhaps even mortgage some of their assets there, why can't one try to invest in private companies where the returns are have been historically greater than the stock market? So I'm with you on that one. So yeah, I think we're just about out of time. Could you tell our listeners where they could find you? What kind of things are you into now on social media, where they could find your interest in writing?
Yeah, I mean, you can definitely. I'm not a heavy social media user. I don't have a Facebook account. I am on Twitter at Rob May, but I don't tweet a ton these days. I feel like it's become a nasty place. I write on Medium, so if you look for Rob May Medium, you can find me. And then obviously you can find me a lot on the Talla blog, Talla.com, and then check out my newsletter, inside.com/AI.
Awesome. And we'll post up all those links on the website. And thank you very much, Rob, for joining us today. And thank you all for listening in.
All right. Thanks for having me.